Hi, so this is my Pac-Man Anniversary machine. There are actually two versions of this machine. This machine came out in around 2005, and there's actually a 2000 version for the 20th anniversary, and this is the 25th anniversary logo. I got this machine basically in trade. I nearly got it for almost free, and it had some issues. It was shorting, and the board wasn't getting through its ROM check, so I figured out the short. I got it to boot, and then I actually changed the PCB. This is a different PCB in here, but I wanted to talk about this machine because it has a really interesting story. So I was doing some research on the whole story of these reissue cabs, and they came around 2000, and it was for the 20th anniversary. And the originals came out around 1980 for Pac-Man, and then Ms Pacman was 81, I believe, which is why they have that. The 20th anniversary is Ms Pacman and Galaga. It's this logo with this logo, and they use the theme of high school class reunion for that, where these are all characters that kind of popped up into their high school 20th reunion, so they're getting back together. And so Pac-Man was left out on this one. As Ms Pacman and Galaga, both for 81. 4 years later, they did another reissue for the 25th anniversary, and that's this cab. Identically, they're basically the same cab. Graphically, they're very different. So they have the same general specs. The joysticks, the monitors are basically the same. Glass all around. This is the full deluxe coin-op version of the cab, and they actually had some legal troubles because, as you know, with Ms Pacman, it is actually not developed by Namco. It was licensed from another team that was developing a newer version of Pac-Man, a hack. And then they licensed it to Namco or Midway, and then it became part of the whole Pac-Man family. But it wasn't originally developed by Namco, and so they pay royalties for every single coin-op version needs to pay back. So when they did the 20th anniversary cabs, they used Ms Pac-Man, and they weren't paying royalties, and so they got them under some fire. Now the board actually wasn't even developed by Namco. It was developed by Cosmodog, some developer in Chicago that was associated with, I think, Atlas Distribution, which was an arcade distribution group. And what they wanted and what they noticed was some Ed Pellegrini or something like that. He was finding out that operators were still really clamoring for Pac-Man cabs, even though it was 20 years old, and they were still making money on it. And so he came up with the idea to pitch to Bandai Namco, Midway, whoever owned the rights at that time, to reissue the cabs and to re-release them as full arcade cabs. And that's where the anniversary cabs came about. And so Cosmodog did the development on it. They built a board that emulates both Ms Pacman, or Pac-Man Ms Pacman hardware is actually the same board. It has different ROM sets, and there's a daughter board for different additional ROMs for Ms Pacman, but it's really identically the same board. Galaga has a different board which has actually 3 Z80 processors, because there's so many sprites moving on screen, and there's only like 6 or something sprites for Pac-Man Ms Pacman, but for Galaga there's up to 60 sprites moving on screen, so it became a board that used 3 processors. And so the anniversary board, which comes stock in this machine, and the other 20th anniversary board is a board that uses a processor that is very similar to the Z80, and it can handle the 3 module, the 3 Z80s in its hardware, and it runs an emulation. And so they basically got all 3 ROMs working on the anniversary board. And so that board was also in the 20th anniversary version. What it did was it hid the Pac-Man ROM, and you, by a different code, you can actually like a joystick and button code, you can actually unlock Pac-Man and play that. And you can also put additional code in to get fast Ms Pacman and fast Pac-Man. So you could play the fast versions, and I believe you can do the fast fire for Galaga. I'm not sure about that, but I think that there was a code for it. I'm not too sure. I've replaced this board with something called an arcade SD that runs a bunch more games other than that, and so it's like a 60 in one, but it actually has other ROMs like the Nintendo ROMs, and you can even get a license from the guy that did the ROM hack for Foundry. And I even got was a Pauline edition, so this one's kind of cool. It's the Donkey Kong where they swap Donkey Kong and Pauline, so you play Pauline, and so it's a girl entitlement in this one. So this machine is basically a clone of the original Pac-Man Ms Pacman cab, the Midway cab, but it's all dressed as a Namco cab. Midway's isn't participating in this, or I don't think they even have any rights to the games anymore. So they Chicago, I think Chicago Manufacturing, they built the cabs, and then they ran everything through Namco, and so the artwork was done in Chicago also through another group, and even I believe the flyers and the ad campaign. So none of this really came from Namco, which is an interesting story. It came really out of a group that thought that there was a market for these cabs, and they worked with Namco to bring it back to the arcade, and so it's an interesting story there. Later on, Namco got more involved with the Pixel and the party versions of the arcade. They have newer versions of it, and some of those actually don't have CRT screens. The great thing about these cabs is that even though it only has 3 games, it actually has a CRT screen. The newer versions, based on Namco System 246, which is basically a PlayStation 2 board, and runs a modified version of their PlayStation game, their museum games, where they have multiple games running. So the party version and the Pixel arcade, they actually have much more ROMs, and so it's like 12 to 20 games or something like that. It's a lot more than the 3 games that came in these anniversary boards, as they're known as. And the board is actually very close to the original arcade hardware. They're meant to emulate or be as close to the Galaga and Pac-Man family boards as possible, so that they only run those 3 games. Thanks.